Okay, so now we're incorporating nonfiction sources into argumentative writing. So our approach is going to be a little bit different. When we're dealing with literary evidence, you'll remember we have to introduce the context of the quote. We're usually looking for speaker, listener, plot clue, those types of things. When we're looking at informational text, especially for argument, what we're looking to do is to provide some information about the source that makes it seem credible and believable. I want you to picture kind of a debate, right? You have people going back and forth, arguing. One thing that debaters will go after is the source information. And so I want you to think of it like that. Think of it as though you're in a debate and someone might try to make your source look weak. You want to gather information about the source that makes it seem credible and impressive so that it makes sense to your reader or your listener why you would go to this source to gather information to support you. It's kind of like if you're arguing with someone and you pull in a friend to help you because that friend agrees with you. If that friend is just somebody who has formed an opinion, that's not going to help you much. But if your friend is a researcher on the topic, well, then that's definitely going to help you make your case. So when we're writing, we usually introduce the source by pulling selective information that makes the source seem pretty believable, pretty credible, and as though it could really support the points that we want to make, the claims that we want to make in our argument overall. So a few things to look at. So we want to start with the website. What kind of website is it? Is it a news source that would be well known and trusted? In this case, we can see, it's not a .edu, so it's not educational necessarily or associated with a school, I should say. It's not a .org, so it's not associated with a particular organization. So we definitely need to look into this. So if you look at just the name itself, Public School Review, well, that tells us a lot. And then you start to click on some of the links, what you'll realize is that this has a very specific purpose. And this purpose is to help educate parents about schools, public schools. So imagine, maybe you're moving and your parents are just trying to decide exactly where they want to buy a house. Well, they're probably going to look into the schools to help them make the decision. So this might be a website that they could go to for that purpose. So once you get the purpose of the website, you can kind of say, well, okay, so this is good. There's not necessarily an agenda for or against uniforms. This is not necessarily a site or an article that has an agenda of being biased, right? The purpose of this is to help parents as they pick out schools. So now that I know the kind of purpose of the website, that helps me. And as you look through, you can see it's pretty professionally done, so that's a good thing as well. Now, the great thing about a lot of contemporary websites is that they will have links that will tell you some things about their authors. So that's so helpful. So here I can click on the author, and I know some articles don't have authors, but when you have one, definitely do a little digging. You can either click on the name of the author when it's linked in like that, or you can do a little Googling. You can go Google Grace Chen and see if you can find a profile of a writer, and that's probably going to be your Grace or your author from your article, and find out what else has the author written. This is a professional reporter. We want to make sure we're not just pulling in some blog that someone just wrote in as an opinion piece, unless that person's opinion is important to the topic. If it's an opinion of someone who's actually experienced the topic, well, then that's something I can definitely look at. So if you look through this, Grace is actually an educator and is an avid education researcher and writer. So she definitely has a lot of credibility when it comes to this topic. So that's information that I'm going to definitely gather and use when I introduce my source. So another thing to think about too is when we actually pull out specific information, we can look at, does it have a source? Because then we'd want to introduce that as well. So for instance, this statistic comes from the National Center for Education. So if I, use this statistic, I'll definitely bring in this part of the source. So not only, is it from a website with a pretty good purpose and from an author who is an expert, but then this quote itself, this information itself, comes from the National Center for Education Statistics. So clearly that would be a great place to get statistics on something school related. If I go down here and I look at these statistics, they come from an actual school. Again, that would be really helpful since I'm looking at something that's very much school related. This is they have some more statistics from a publication called The School Administrator. If you look down further, you could see it said there's a superintendent who is consulted. Here we have a doctor who is a child and adolescent psychologist who's quoted. So this is pretty solid because not only is the source itself solid and the author solid, but then we have a ton of great sources within the article that we'll use to introduce any of the information that we take. So when you are gathering source information for the parts of the text that you think you're going to take, make sure you gather that stuff, whether it's highlighting it or putting it in notes. It's going to help you make your case, and it's going to give you some of your introductory information before you insert your quote into your work. Let's take a look at this one. Okay, so I was looking at this. It's another .com, and I don't know ThoughtCo. So I have to do a little bit of research. So the first thing I did was just click on the About Us. And as I started to read through this, I realized, oh, there's some great information I can use here. So let's just look through this together. ThoughtCo is a premier reference site with a 20-plus year focus on expert-created education content. We're proud to be one of the top 10 information sites as measured by ComScore, a leading internet measure company. I'm just going to start skimming through. They received the Communicator Award in the General Education category, a Davie Award in the Education category. And then I was reading, they have 13 million users who write in and ask questions, and they get their questions answered. So when you know that you've got a lot of people coming to the source, that's helpful. That makes the source seem more impressive for sure. It's not just some website that somebody created in his basement for his own entertainment. This is something that people do come to frequently, do depend on, do read. And notice the articles are written by literature writers, PhDs, experienced instructors. And then if you go through, you can read about how the writers have advanced degrees. Particularly, you have some of these authors who are named and all their credentials are included. So when we go back to the article, we can see if we have any of these authors. So we'll have even more information we can gather on the particular author. Okay, so this one's Melissa Kelly. And how nice is this? They've even linked in credentials. They know it's important to you to know who's writing this, to know that it's someone who has respect, who has expertise, who has education when it comes to the topic. So notice this person has a master's in education and curriculum and instruction and a bachelor's in history. We know Melissa is actually a teacher, instructional designer, and an author in the field of education. So all of that information is really helpful. We're definitely going to take notes on that so that when we introduce our evidence into our argument, we can draw on some of that. And then same thing as I skim through. National Center for Education Statistics. She has footnotes, and you can even, you don't even have to click on them, but you can see where the information came from. So if I use any of these statistics, I can say where the statistics came from. So we have the source within a source that we can use to introduce our evidence and make it seem credible. And you'll see that that's throughout. So this is another great source, and I'm going to take notes on where my information came from and feel pretty confident that I can defend these sources and introduce them in my writing.